Hello, welcome folks. This is ASAN's webinar on mutual aid, pod mapping, and care webs. We're really happy to have folks join us today. We're going to be doing a smaller panel, and I'm really happy to have with us, I'll let our panelists introduce themselves in a couple minutes. Couple minutes. Right, probably now. You might recognize, we actually have one of our staff members on our panel today, Zoe Gross, and we have from Autistic People of Color Fund, we have Oluwatobi, Odugunwa, and we're really happy to get into this conversation and grateful that y'all were able to give us your time today. To get started, I know I just kind of gave who y'all are, but if you all appreciate your patience, everybody, because I remember how to talk. Can the panelists please introduce themselves by sharing your names, your pronouns, and talking a little bit about how y'all's work ties into mutual aid, pod mapping, and care webs for the audience?
Sure, I can start. I'm Zoe Gross. I'm the Director of Advocacy at the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. My pronouns are she, her. I believe that mutual aid, pod mapping, and care webs are all really important tools for autistic people, and especially autistic people who can't access state supports.
Hi everyone. My name is Oluwatobi Odugunwa. I use they them pronouns. Um, I am here as the director of the community grant program at the People of Color Fund. We do advocacy work and we have a mutual aid fund for autistic POC all over the US. Um, in my in my non-work time, I also volunteer with two other mutual aid groups. One of them is Trans Aid Nashville that does mutual aid for folks in the Tennessee area, particularly around the capital, Nashville. I also do work with a more informal group that also does mutual aid for multi-marginalized folks. Um, the question was how I'm forgetting it.
I think you did the whole thing.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, you did. Thank you. Um, now, now I kind of want us to get into setting sort of definitions here of so when we're talking about mutual aid, pod mapping, and care webs, what do each of those words mean? And then like could y'all give define those words and also maybe give some examples? And I will post this in the in the panelist chat so y'all can see it.
Or Oluwatobi, do you want to start here or should I? All right. So pod mapping is a concept from activist Mia Mingus, who initially made pod mapping up to apply to community accountability and restorative justice. So your pod is the group of people you can go to if someone harms you or who will hold you accountable if you harm someone else. Your pod includes the people you turn to for support, your acquaintances who might become your supporters if you build a stronger relationship, and community organizations that can provide resources to you. You can also use pod mapping to figure out who would support you in other circumstances, like many people used it during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic to figure out who could assist them while they were in quarantine. Mutual aid is, I'm going to let Oluwatobi speak to this in more detail, but community solidarity, where people within a community share resources with each other. And then care webs and care collectives I learned about in Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarshina's book, Care Work. Specifically, the book profiles a woman named Laurie Erickson, her care web. Laurie Erickson is a wheelchair user, and her care collective is a group of friends and volunteers that do her personal care supports. As I understand it, a care web or care collective can be one person's care collective where the support is flowing towards meeting one person's needs, or it can be a group of people who are all working to meet each other's needs or something in between.
Yeah. Thank you so much for providing those definitions. I can add about mutual aid. That is like the framework that I have most experience in. But mutual aid is essentially when people within a community pool resources to support folks within their community. So this can be that community can be based on like location. It can also be based on identities. It can be based also on like an organizing group or like a field. Um, so I feel like in mutual aid work, there's often like kind of like two modalities of kind of going about it. So a lot of times, so when you're talking about financial resources, um, for like specifically like direct giving mutual aid, um, you usually have folks who are focused on pooling resources that already exist within that community. And then there's also a framework of like bringing in money, essentially like dirty money, from like corporations, foundations, money that like was made off of often off the backs of the people who are then in part of those like mutual aid networks. And then some people do both. Some people like do like a mix of like I think a lot of people do both, but there are a lot of like, especially more like local organizations or organizations relegated to like a specific like area, who will pool resources just from the people in that area. A lot of the work that I do is a mix, but I have more of a focus on like redistributing dirty blood money back to the communities that that money was kind of like raised off of. Um, yeah. So mutual aid, apart from just direct given, mutual aid can also be kind of like resource mapping across like your local area, your state, the country. Um, Mutual aid also kind of can take the place of like a SWAT group. So they've like gained more popularity as the economy has kind of like as the economy continues to go down the drain. But they've like these groups have always existed. But there will often be like local groups that will like people will post like this is an item I no longer need. Does anyone in this like community need it? So they have like yeah, I'm personally in like a couple of like queer SWAT groups in my local community. I know there's I'm forgetting the name of this, but it's a group for like free stuff that there's like multiple chapters all over the country. The chapters are usually held on Facebook. So there
Is
are
it
ways
Buy
of both.
Nothing?
Yes, yes, it is. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, but there's a lot of ways and like a lot of people who are doing work around distributing money and also just like physical resources, sharing them amongst each other.
Awesome, thank y'all. I personally really appreciate it because I have vague concepts of what each of those terms mean and how they're separate from each other, but definitely have struggled with the nuance and also didn't realize that mutual aid can also include pulling down money from these spaces that like are hoarding resources and getting it back into the community. That's really awesome. I'm going to learn more about that. Thank you. Um, the the next question we have is how do these forms of community care work with other systems of care, like official ones like Medicaid, SNAP, and programs that are run like more, oopsie, sorry, I accidentally full screened my thing. And let me start over because I did that. How do these forms of community care work with other systems of care like Medicaid, SNAP, and programs that are run by nonprofit organizations that aren't necessarily doing like mutual aid or community care pod mapping?
I can start off. So a lot of times, mutual aid serves as a complement to these like state and more like nonprofit like systems of like in group, I guess, systems of support. But a lot of the time, uh, mutual aid is like the only alternative, the only option for people who probably should be receiving like state care but are unable to access it for the variety of reasons that is the case. Either like the application process. People like you often have to apply for SSDI multiple times, oftentimes with a lawyer before like your case, before like your application is approved, regardless of like your personal situation. Um, there's also, I think, one thing that I wanted to bring up is like the tension between those things. Because when you are qualifying for a lot of these, especially the government programs, there are income requirements and income limits, whereas like you cannot work a job. You cannot work like more than a certain amount of hours, or they will take away your benefits. But these benefits are the limits for these are like they're under the poverty level, like the poverty income limit for folks. Um and something that I have come across a lot in mutual aid is in direct giving programs where like we're sending folks cash um um through like sending folks like money. It can be we have to like go about it a very specific way where like if needed, like the programs that I'm a part of are set up to essentially send people letters that are like, this is a gift, this is not income, this is because that is actually why the Autistic People of Color Fund, why our micro grant limits are between $100 and $500, because up until the most recent presidency, $600 was the amount of like if you gave someone $600, or I think either at or above $600, like you would have to like send them like a contractor form. And so we set up those limits when that was like still the law, in order to prevent folks, because a lot of folks that apply to our organization like are receiving like SSI and SSDI, to keep folks kind of safe. So it's a really like it's a there's a huge tension between these two kinds of resources, because it can be very easy for mutual aid to jeopardize. It can be very easy for the state to use mutual aid to jeopardize someone's access, but at the same time, like, which is very frustrating because people who are receiving state benefits need mutual aid because they're not getting the money and resources that they need to like survive and thrive. Um, for example, like, a lot of us might already know this, but like folks aren't able to like keep a savings. Like there is a limit. I think that limit has been increased in the past few years, or there's people are fighting for that to be increased. So that's often like the tension that can exist between state and like community aid.
Um, Something else that I will just add is that a lot of people with disabilities need support in order to access um, care or help that's coming from the government or from nonprofits. Um, Either because they have to fill out a really complicated form, or they have to make a phone call, or the food bank is only accessible by car, or there for whatever reason there are access barriers in the way of um, them attaining that support. And many of those barriers are put there on purpose. Like you have to fill out so many forms to get on and stay on Medicaid because the government knows some people won't be able to do it and will be kicked off even though they qualify. Um, and in government circles, they talk about what's called a woodwork effect, which is they say if we make benefits easier to get on, people will come out of the woodwork to get on the benefits. Um, which yes, that would be a good thing. We should do it. But that's not how many government workers see the situation, unfortunately. Um, so I would say not only what Oluwatobi said that the mutual aid can pick up where government aid leaves off, but also that sometimes you may need support just to begin accessing help from either a nonprofit or a government source.
Thank y'all. And I actually want to ask like a follow-up question to make sure my information's correct too, of like part of the stuff that sucks. There's a very long list of why the income restrictions and like suck about these like social support programs. But it doesn't just include like actual money that you have, right? It can include things like if you have something like a car in your possession, the value of the car. Am I correct or no?
My understanding is what counts as an asset or as income depends on what program. So, for example, um, for Medicaid, your assets are like the stuff that you own and what's in your bank account, and they often don't count a car or a house. So you're allowed to have those, but you can't, for example, have enough money saved to get your car fixed if it breaks, um, or to replace the roof on your house that you're allowed to have, or other such things like owning the home and the car are kind of made progressively more impossible by the limits on your savings. And then for SSI, for income from the government on the basis of disability, there are what's called in-kind restrictions, which I don't know a ton about, but this is like a really draconian set of rules that says, for example, if someone buys groceries for you, you have to count that as income, and it will be taken out of your like SSI check for the month. If someone is letting you stay with them, you have to count the monetary value of what you would pay in rent as like a gift that they're giving you, and that counts against your SSDI in some way. So the how things like income and assets are calculated and what counts and what doesn't is different for different programs.
Um, Something I will add, this might be something that like we go into later, but a lot of the often folks who are receiving like government aid will end up like will out of necessity end up having to work, and in order to keep their health insurance that they need to stay alive, or to keep the money that like like the the payments that they get, like these roles have to be like under the table kind of roles, which opens up like these marginalized folks to even more like abuse, to persecution and like a vulnerability danger. And so there is um the US is a very funny place that critiques corruption in other countries, but at the core of this like country, like there needs to be like some people can only access like non legal support, and this includes like lawn care. It also includes sex work, and what like ends up happening is that like the making these like forms of work like illegal and keeping these restrictions like it makes sure that there's always like an underground form of like multiple underground forms of like a multiple underground economies essentially, which keeps a lot of vulnerable folks like in danger, and also like they can't survive without that. It's a very like it's very frustrating.
Thank you so much for adding that on as like because it is an intentional gap that is made that y'all are speaking to of the way in which the programs are set up to make it incredibly hard for people to get them in the first place, incredibly hard to keep them, but they also actually aren't something that like someone can truly live off of and be stabilized by, which is really in the politest thing you can call it, I think, is cruel in a lot of ways. So I appreciate y'all speaking to that, and also thank you, Zoe, for like clarifying my like giving me the clarification on the in-kind stuff. Um, and the next question that we have is about getting started. Um, so for folks who are looking to get started with doing like mutual aid and like care work in their own communities, what would y'all recommend be like, say, their first three steps?
I would say this depends on what like where you want to start. If you want to start by like joining your local mutual aid group, you could, your first step would be finding them, finding their Facebook group or their website or whatever, however they organize, contacting them and asking what kind of help they need or like how you can help support. If you're looking to create something like your own pod or care collective, you might begin by mapping your pod. There's a worksheet available online to do that if you look up pod mapping. I also recommend reading the first chapter of Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samrashina's book Care Work for more information on care collectives. And the author also provides a great list of questions to ask yourself as you're beginning a care collective. Then you might do something like identifying your own needs and what kind of support you need to receive and what kind of support, if any, you can offer the people in your web. And then I would do the daunting step of beginning to talk to the people closest to you about potentially supporting each other in these ways and pooling effort to provide care to each other.
Some things that I would add on are some things that I would add on are so first steps. I think yeah, first steps is like getting involved. It's always like I feel like the first step is like relationship building, because it is like it's often very important to trust the folks um that you're kind of doing this work with, especially as an organization like especially like when you're dealing with very vulnerable communities. It is constantly happening even on apps like Signal where like ICE agents or government agents like will infiltrate these spaces, and essentially like put a stop to that work and like cause like active disruption. So I would say like yeah, building trust, building relationships, especially when you are doing work that is local. um I think something that we often forget because of how like disempowered we are is that like there are things that we do have access to, things that like we like that already exist, that we already own, that like we can share with our community members, that don't have to be bought, and don't have to be like solicited from outside sources. Another and like it can help to like when you know somebody, you like you know more about them, you know like what they have, what skills they have, and that can be like a like even if you're not building like a starting a deep relationship, just having like a friendly relationship, being like values aligned, making sure that like y'all are on similar pages about like how you interact like with law enforcement, and all those kinds of things. So that might be getting more into like longer term like kind of stuff. But I think it's often like good to like when you're starting these projects to like start on good footing, because it can be very easy for like the things that like were not super significant at the start to like start becoming problems as you grow on. So like setting a good like foundation, starting with relationships, values, all that kind of stuff, is great. And the next thing that I would also say is like resource mapping in your communities. I think that it's super helpful. Like even we talked about like how like federal agencies and offices and programs um, can be like harmful, and how like they can be um, yeah, anyways, I'll stop there. But when you are at the like local level, the city level, I would say mostly like city level. State gets a little more funkier. But at the city level, you can often like find people who are working in like local like offices, like at like your local like office of like homeless services. That like people who are like safe folks. And I think it's very important to start mapping out the resources that already exist. And once you have capacity for it, to like vet those resources. Um, because a lot of I think it's important like to not have to reinvent the wheel. Like there are people who are doing this work, and like um, the important thing I think is like not necessarily yeah, starting your own thing if you don't have to, but like kind of building on the work that people already exist in. You don't need to like, invent something if it already exists, in a way that, like serves your community and keeps people safe. So that's something that I would say. Like try to like I would agree with Zoe with like trying to get involved with the work that already exists, and then doing like resource mapping in your community. In my local community, when SNAP benefits were cut, a lot of folks like put in effort and created this like master list document of like 300 different like resources that were offering like food boxes, like cold food ingredients, like cooked meals and such. So it can be and there's some of those places I had never heard of before. So there are things that exist, and it's also important, especially when you're working with like disabled folks, with like trans folks, folks of color, immigrants, that like you are also like when you have as you have capacity for it, vetting these resources to see if like they're even safe to send people to.
Thank y'all. And thank y'all for emphasizing the thing of like seeing what's already existing in your community rather than trying to start something from the ground up because it's way easier to build collective power if we just join in with what's already happening than to constantly try and generate enough energy and resources to start ourselves. And Oluwatobi, also thank you for emphasizing the fact of like vetting stuff. I think that can be, particularly when we are looking at like community resources, it can be a really important thing. I know one of our colleagues, his local group has a list, did a similar thing that y'all did in your community of like finding food resources, but also included like some of those places did have barriers. They might have had work requirements or like that you had to attend a religious ceremony or something like that. And knowing what those things are and having that clear for folks can be really helpful. So thank y'all for naming those bits. And also like so that kind of I think leads us a little bit into the next question of like right now we live in a world that often wants to draw this line between people who need help and people who do the helping. How does mutual aid, pod mapping, and care webs break down those lines?
So I think they definitely can. A slogan in mutual aid, for example, is solidarity, not charity, meaning that it's not like the model of there's a group of people giving help to a group of people receiving help, and that's all those people ever do. It's the help is going to be traded around within a community. Care collectives often work the same way. But I did want to say as well that it doesn't have to be this like super reciprocal thing to be a functional like care collective or mutual aid group. And that especially as people with disabilities, there's always going to be some times where some of us can't provide as much help back as we need, or even can't like don't have the capacity to provide support to others because our all our resources are just going to keeping ourselves alive. And people in those situations still deserve support and care. Um, and so I think like a care collective where everyone is giving each other support is cool, and a care collective that is um, meeting the needs of one person like is also a really important model.
Um, I think another I guess this is kind of like just like more general, but like another slogan that I thought of when you mentioned that, Zoe, is like by us for us. I think mutual aid kind of works best when it is like people within those communities who are like building power to like support each other. And I think on like the next tier, like building across like different like marginalized communities to like build even more power. Um, I would say that I think something that like I think something that I wanted to just kind of name that is like in like that like charity model is something that is like ingrained in us and that will show up both um like in the instance of like the person who is helping facilitating to sending resources and also on the part of the person who's like receiving resources. Like these are like this is how like we were brought up, this is how we were raised, and like we tend to fall into those patterns. I think that it's very important for people who are like doing this work and interacting to like be centering like community and like liberation and like justice. Um, and I think it's very important, like it as like the burden of capitalism and fascism like increases, it can be, I don't know, my cat is being very loud. It can be easy for it can be easy to get like trapped in that cycle. So I think it's very important. Um, Something that I have to sometimes like remind the folks that I'm like helping like access mutual aid is that I depend on mutual aid too. Like I am not like from up top, you know, like sending down help. Like I am yeah, I'm like right there with you. I like have depended on like mutual aid, like therapy funds for years, like food banks. Like I've applied for like direct mutual aid myself. Um, I am also like, one huge emergency away from, like houselessness. Um, and I think that like sometimes there like gets to be this kind of like I think it's important for people to forget that like we're not giving services, like we're like trying to show up for community. Like please humanize and like get to know the people who are like facilitating mutual aid, and also like if you're facilitating mutual aid, like don't forget that we are not the 1%. These are our people. These are our neighbors. These are our community members. Like we often like have been or will be in a situation. And if you're someone who like perhaps like are part of a collective, a group like Resource Generation, it's a group for like wealthy young people to like redistribute their wealth. I think it's very important that like finding a role of like putting that money to work like where people are already doing that work, and like I think it's also important that like we're reminding ourselves of like the agency we have and like the power and like resources that we already have. I think that I wanted to like add on to like what you said, Zoe, about like reciprocity. I think that like the point of like mutual aid is to help facilitate a world where everyone is taken care of. That is like um my personal practice and like what I like what my commitment is to. Um, and I think there's a lot of time that like it can be easy to like value money. And it can be easy to like value, I don't know, like active, I don't know, productive care. I don't even know how to like put that into words, but like being in community with somebody, like having a conversation with them, like that is what being people, is like about. It is like, and I think that like it's very important to like cherish like all the parts of that interaction, like being there for someone who is like telling you about like what they've been going through. Like that is like also an important part of mutual aid, not just the distribution. I think it's super important that like we prioritize like community and like seeing people as like people that we could know. That could be our I think um yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank y'all. I appreciate the reframing and like the emphasis on the fact that it's not necessarily about, because like I think one of the most helpful like ways of understanding like community care and mutual aid for me, like grokking it, is the thing of like it's not always immediately one, it's not transactional. It's the emphasis is on, like y'all are saying, community. It's not the thing of like you help me on Tuesday, I'll help you on Saturday. Like it's a thing, and it's also how we help each other. I have friends who have young children. I don't. I have multiple disabilities. But I might help my friends with their childcare stuff, or like help them around thing of like you can't get around because you've got a toddler. I can't read this form. Can you please help me with this form? Like figuring out those little things that are also part of that. And Oluwatobi, like we were saying, of bringing things back down of like we're not it's not we're up here giving stuff and then here's everybody receiving stuff. We are here together figuring out how we can shift this structural power balance around us. I think that's really important to remember, that we have agency and the ability to make choices and figure out resources and not do that alone. Our last planned question for the day circles back into thinking about like the current landscape around support programs, in particular with the extreme cuts to Medicaid, many people are going to be losing important healthcare access. How do you think these changes to government programs that are meant to help people will change mutual aid and community care in the coming months as well as the coming years?
So my hope would be, and this is complicated because in many people's lives, mutual aid can't be a complete replacement for what society should be providing to them. Um, and it can look like, oh, one or two people are trying to fix a systemic level problem. Um, it doesn't always like math out. But at the same time, I hope that many people will see that the state is abandoning their disabled neighbors, and that there are ways they can help. And while if someone is losing their access to see a doctor, for example, if you're not a doctor, you can't like prescribe them meds or consult with them about their healthcare needs. But if someone is losing their personal care supports, for example, maybe you can cook them dinner once a week. Maybe you can take one of the support shifts that they need filled, like on a, twice a month. You don't have to fix everything in someone's life to be contributing to their support. So just like finding one place to start, I think is something I hope more people will do as they see that the government is kind of trying to not hold up its end in terms of taking care of everyone who lives here.
Yeah, that is, yeah, second all of that. I think something else that I'm also thinking about is so I for like some context, I was at a digital security training earlier today, and something that one of like the facilitators talked about is how like um, we are in like the early to middle stages of uh, a genocide for trans people in the US. Um, Folks who are here, I mention this because like autistic people and trans people, like our communities are people are often like part of both communities, and also like like we should be our people like they're already coming for disabled people, like they're coming for trans people, like we it's important that even if you don't belong to both communities, that like we're working together and are aware of like the threats that other folks are facing, because they will often start off on one population and then like, increase scope. Um, for example, I believe the state is Kansas, where they've essentially like revoked trans people's like right to drive, where if you are trans, and like the sex marker on like your birth certificate and like what's on your license or your like if you are trans and you have a license that that indicates that like that license is no longer valid. Um, there is also like I hadn't really been thinking about this in this way, but like the rules against the rules that are banning like gender affirming care, something that like people of all genders and all relationships, cis and trans people like receive all the time. Um, that is like forced detransitioning that is happening. A lot of this is happening even faster in institutions, in like uh, care institutions, and in prisons. So those folks are feeling the brunt of this stuff like more than we are outside. But I'm saying all that to say that that it is important that um, and I will like reiterate what Zoe said about like one step at a time. Like one individual like we're not trying to be saviors. We're not trying to be heroes. We're just trying to show up how we can and like fill a part of like the role that like our community needs. And I will also say that it is like um, I think more critical that like we are starting to invest in like community solutions to these roles that the state is filling for us. For example, and this is like it's not to dismiss like people's like disabilities or like the like critical and specialized medical care that a lot of people need. Um, I think it's also important that like we are reclaiming from the medical industrial complex the tools that like our communities have had and have used in the past to like heal ourselves and take care of ourselves. Um, I think it's important to like um to for us to be investing like a close friend of mine is a friend of mine is working on getting like a water filtration system for their local city that is like run by folks there because like, their water is not clean. And I think that it's important when we can to be supporting and helping to build like these like community-led infrastructures. I know a lot of folks are also like, the thought has escaped me, but I think that that in addition to like I think in addition to surviving what is happening now, that we should also be thinking about like building for what is to come and like reducing our dependence on like these systems as much as possible. Because as like surveillance increases, it's going to be even easier to target and find and like restrict like critical resources from folks who need them, who like are most vulnerable. So like if you can like I don't know, like perhaps like you crochet and like there's like a local like queer farmer. Like perhaps like you crochet like some like I don't know, some like pot, separators like holders, whatever, for them and like in exchange like you get like free eggs. I think it's I guess not free eggs. You trade I think it's like super important that we are building and are aware of the fact that like not in a doomsday prepper way, but like these institutions have abandoned us in the past and are doing so now. And as much as we can, if we can like yeah, build those infrastructures outside of them. Yeah.
Thank y'all. Yeah, I think bringing back like I think culturally there was a like that knowledge of just getting used to like sharing communal resources of like not everybody on the block needs to own a lawnmower or like a like all of these specialized tools and just starting those kind of things. And in the same way of the like the bartering economy of I can do these things if you do these things for me. Like if you can cook me dinner a couple nights a week, then like I can sit with your kids while they do their homework. Like those things that so that you can get some downtime, like figuring out those small things because like y'all are right. We as a community cannot replace these programs which are funded by us and meant to be supporting us in our communities. They are ours. And I think I'm trying to remember the phrasing you used, Zoe, of essentially like the government's stepping away from the job that it's supposed to do. It's ignoring its responsibilities to like the people that are represented by it. And we're having to find these stops in the middle. And like I think it is important to recognize we can't completely replace that, but we can ease the suffering. Like we can support one another and reduce like naming the fact of like just reducing the isolation by being in community with each other and being able to have those times because that does a lot to I know I find like in the community spaces I am in those like small conversations as we are doing work like as we are doing whatever the heck we've gathered to do often helps ease the anxiety and remind us that we have the ability to like support one another and make changes. So I think that's really important and also helps when these large scale things are happening. I think it's incredibly common to enter into that space of being frozen, feeling so the problem is so big and I am so small and I don't know what to do. And zooming back into like, who are my neighbors? Like, do I know my neighbors? Have I ever talked to them before? Like, what about my friends? What about my family members and like their neighbors and their neighbors' neighbors? And how can we start to build those networks like that way gradually over time as we build up like that trust? So thank y'all. And I'm going to check our Q&A now that we're at the open space. Um, we have one question that says, this strikes me that this kind of network is very difficult for autistics to interact with. What kind of strategies exist for us to be able to find/build community? And I
So I
will
have a
say that.
couple thoughts on this. Um, One, I would say you can make this an entirely autistic mutual aid network if you want. If you know 3, 5, 8 more autistic people in your local area. If you know autistic people who know autistic people, we could do it all for ourselves if we want to do that. Um, my other thought is if you want to get involved with an existing mutual aid network or care collective and you don't know how to do the social approach to them, um, do you have a friend who does? Do you know someone who is socially fluent and can go with you as you're pair together and you go to the mutual aid event together and you meet people there that way? Um, like I said, for a lot of disabled people, we need support to access support. And this might be one way that we could get it. Um, I was I was listening on audiobook to Care Work to like refresh myself for this uh, panel. And one of the things that the author talks about is attempts that they've been a part of to um, create like care collectives and mutual aid networks that are entirely disabled people, and in this case, entirely queer disabled people of color. Um, and like the what worked about that and what didn't work about that. Um, and I think one of the things that might not work when everyone in the network is disabled is like, what if everyone has a flare at once? And no one has capacity right now to help anyone else. Um, it can become like a health insurance pool that only has people who need to see a lot of doctors in it. Um, so branching out eventually could be a good thing. But if you want to start with all disabled people and see like where that takes you, I think that's a fantastic idea.
I think that's something to like add on to what you were saying, Zoe. I think that something that can also happen is like let's say you start off like I think I think you can be in a space with like a lot of like other disabled people, a lot of other autistic people, and still not feel seen,
Hmm.
and like still have that space be curated to a specific type of like disabled person, specific type of autistic person, and I think that's something that can like help autistic folks, disabled folks like feel be able to access these space more is like the creation of norms, and perhaps like so like, okay, let's say you're starting a small group, a mutual aid group that is just autistic folks, and like you come up with like the like you kind of like as like perhaps like you plan this as y'all are in community, like you like kind of like build these kinds of like norms, these ways of like going through meetings, these ways of like accessing the space, I guess if that makes sense. Like perhaps like one of the examples that is like super common, but like wasn't I think super common now, but like wasn't as I think so much like 5, 10 years ago. But like plan breaks, but like that's like one simple way of like making a space more accessible. I think that like something that can help is like okay if you're starting your own group like developing like just writing down these norms that will naturally come up and like doing your research into like work that other disabled folks, like listening to a podcast, a video, reading a book, listening to an audiobook, um, figuring out what those norms are, what are the practices that like help, that will help disabled autistic folks feel more safe in that space, and like for like another like if you're so when you then like are wanting to connect with people outside of that group, you can share those norms with them. Perhaps you're already aware of these norms and you want to connect with the group that already exist, like talking to those folks about like how can we make this space like more accessible for folks like me. And I think that that's like often a green flag when people are like, yeah, like we have not thought about this before. Thank you for bringing this up, or like this is something that we're already doing, which is like the nice surprising idea that you sometimes get. Like perhaps they're not doing all that you need, but perhaps they're doing something that like fits the needs of somebody else, and that's like the place to kind of like hop in. Um, I will also say that like if you've got any like chatty autistics in your community, if you got like the like really sociable like ADHD folks, like those are also like folks that can serve as like yeah, as like bridges between folks who are like who find like social interactions like harder. So I think like yeah, leveraging the skills of the people that you already have, like figuring out like what are some norms in your life, and like in like group life, group practices that like you can like maintain and also like bring to other groups. I think are ways that these spaces can become more accessible and like can like yeah, can make it so that autistic folks can like flourish and thrive in that and thrive in them.
Thank y'all. And while I am not on the panel, I do also want to offer my own suggestion of a thing I do. Um, I am the type of person who, like, for me, I've learned it's an individual norms thing, I think, of like figuring out like my what I need to be comfortable in a space before I enter it. So oftentimes it's a thing of like if I'm intentionally setting out to like I joined a community garden a few years ago. And when I did that, I actually ended up on the compost volunteer team. And that's because I know that I like having a clear task. So I would say think about like what kind of mutual aid work are you really interested in getting involved with? And that might be focused on like skills you have. Maybe are you really good at cooking? Um, are you somebody who can take phone calls and talk on the phone? Or maybe you're somebody who's really good at spreadsheets and keeping track of information. Like figuring out things that you are good at. And then also like I frame it because I don't always want to say like tell people about my disabilities up front. I will be like, I gotta be honest with you. I am out picking daisies a lot of times. I don't understand things very easily. Can you help me? I will just ask people very upfront, simple questions. Be like, I'm new. I don't understand. Can you explain this to me? And like, I have found generally, like, and also making sure I pick somebody who doesn't look busy and looks like they like are not like who looks like they slept. They look like they're well rested and they don't look like they're in the middle of something. I will like approach them and be like, "Hi, I want to be a part of this. I don't know what can I do?" And generally people it's not perfect. I've had a multiple of different experiences with it, but that has been a more successful method for me when I'm writing solo into a space. Okay, we have another question that asks, do you have any recommendations for finding people who are interested in mutual aid around neurodiversity things we culturally don't, oh, neurodiversity things we culturally don't usually think to help people with, e.g., making sense of things that are happening in our lives or helping set boundaries during non-speaking moments? It can be hard to even find people who are safe to talk about these things with in neurodiverse spaces.
So, a mutual aid model, or something that I don't know if the people doing it think of it as a mutual aid model, but like a a model for doing those things, you want to be looking into decision-making supports. So things like a circle of support or a micro board are terms for supported decision-making structures that help um, a disabled person who's kind of at the center of the circle um, talk through life decisions and navigate things like systems of benefits or getting their needs met in other ways, talk through life goals. What do they want to do for housing? What do they want to do for jobs, etc. And work towards those goals. That's the job of a micro board. Um, uh, Someone you may know of who worked with a micro board is Lois Curtis, the plaintiff in the Olmsted VLC case, or one of two plaintiffs. But Lois Curtis had an intellectual disability and mental health disabilities, and she worked with a microboard to help her live in the community and meet her goals. Um, and they helped her do things like exhibit her art, um, and other stuff like that. Now, the thing that I don't have as much of a recommendation for is how to find people to put on your microboard or in your circle of support. Most people, if they are putting something together like that, it's going to be close friends and possibly family members, either chosen or biological. Um, But if you don't have someone in your life where you're like, this is the person I would put in my pod, this is the person I would put in my circle, I think that's a point when the pod making exercise can help. Pod mapping exercise can help, where you identify not only people who are currently in your pod, but people who could be if you strengthen your relationship with them. Um, it's an interesting way to think about it. There are also like if you need one-off help with navigating a specific situation, like for example, getting on benefits, there are benefits navigators who can help with that. Choosing your health insurance plan, there are people who can help with just that. So that's a place where you might want to identify community resources.
I think that like as for like if you're looking for people like to join that group, like where to find them, I think something that has I think that like groups that are for folks with disabilities to meet, like support groups or like advocacy groups are like good places to like find folks who like might already be interested in that. And you could start off by like asking if you're not like one of the facilitators or like hosts for the group, like asking if you could have a meeting that is like just around discussing this, or like a social event that is just around like kind of discussing um like meeting these needs and like what people are already doing, seeing like who's interested in this stuff. Um, I am a part of the US Gender and Disability Justice Alliance. It is a group that not autistic, there are autistic people there. But like it is a group for disabled folks who are women and who are like gender diverse folks. So that's like inclusive to like all trans people, all gender non-conforming folks. But it's a group for those folks to meet. And like we do advocacy stuff. We also like do social events. And yeah, that is like a space. It is it's a free virtual space. There are like folks with sensory disabilities like who attend that space. And yeah, so that is something that I would recommend. Seeing if there's a group that meets like that you can access virtually or even locally. Can be like a good place to like start to find those people. Yes, I can send I'll type the name in the chat if that would be helpful.
Thank y'all. And like I think there's I think a thing too that can happen is like building that slowly over time by using these spaces of like support groups and like pod mapping and letting yourself like over like I know I've kind of naturally evolved to have like my friend group has a group chat that sort of functions in that way where it's just like, so I don't know what this meant. Can I share this? And like we collectively as a council will take turns sort of like walking through things to help one another on that front. But that's like something that is built over years. And I also know that I will, whenever I enter into a new space and I'm uncertain, like the first few times I go to that space, I will kind of keep an eye out for people who I mesh with well enough that I'm like, I feel I have a confidence that I can like go over to them and be like, so this thing happened here in this space. I don't know what that meant. Can you help me decipher what that meant? Um, and generally, that has been a sort of MacGyvered way that I have done that for myself, a homebrew system. Um, and wait, I think that was the U.S. Gender and Disability Justice Alliance, Oluwatobi, that you named. Yes, okay, awesome. I will paste that for the main group. And then while I'm doing that, we have one more question that asks any tips for finding groups if you are not on social media?
Are you on the internet, the non-social media internet? Because a lot of my recommendations, if you're not on like Facebook, would be to use like Meetup or Craigslist, to find groups that meet locally to you. If not, there's other things you can do. You can email your local developmental disabilities council and ask, if there are, for example, support groups for people with your particular disability. Um, or some other place where you might someone might know about mutual aid or you might get into mutual aid through this group. Um, you can, oh, I had another idea. I didn't want to know. Oh, put up flyers. Put up flyers in your like local coffee shop or places where you go. Um, like make yourself a an email that's just for this and be like, are you interested in joining a care collective or starting a mutual aid group with me? Email start a mutual aid group Nashville at gmail.com or like wherever you live. Oluwatobi mentioned Nashville earlier, but they already have a mutual aid group, so you wouldn't need to start one there. But wherever you live. Um, that you could go to, for example, like an LGBT center, um, and find out if people there are involved in some kind of mutual aid network. Um, you could go to a resource fair of some kind, either specific to a group, like a trans meetup or a disability resource meetup, um, or a more general one. Those are my ideas. Open it up to the other folks. What do you think?
Think something that is like also a possibility is like if you um perhaps like the group that like the social event that you're at I guess I already kind of said this, like talking to facilitators. Like if you don't feel comfortable like putting the shout out yourself, perhaps you can like talk to the people who like organize that group and they can send out like an email being like, is anybody interested in this? And they can like connect you that way. That's also like a helpful way of like if you're in a group and like you find someone that you mesh with, but like you're not able to like talk to them or like get their email or like phone number, like you can like email the like hoster, whoever like hosted the event and be like, hey, this is someone I'm interested in like getting to know. Could you share my email or like social media or phone number with them if they are interested? And they can do that kind of like they can do that connection work while still like keeping everyone involved like safe and their privacy safe. I I'm gonna think on it a little bit, but I would love to see if like what thoughts you have, Alex.
Thank you all for allowing me to just fold myself into this
Yes,
space.
please.
Um, I think I apologize because I was typing Zoe while you were talking, so I might say things that you did. But like one of the things that I've found over time is like Googling stuff that I want to do. Like I found the garden group because I don't have access to like a place where I can grow things in my home, but I've seen around my city multiple spaces that were community gardens. And ultimately it was actually a friend who suggested the one that I ended up in. But doing things like that of like if you've got a crafting thing that you really enjoy doing, like circling back to crochet. If you really like crochet, checking that out. Like and that like crafts you're interested in, checking out if you go to like libraries, coffee shops, um, art supply stores. That's specific. I'm an artist and I find art supply stores frequently are just like, here's the flyer wall of stuff that's happening that I don't necessarily see in other like places. But like checking out for those kind of places. Someone has suggested in the Q&A square pegs on meetups. Meetups is, I believe, a website that you can meet people on.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we've had somebody else suggest, let me see, the copy and paste function works slightly different. Oh, good. Okay. I'm going to paste this for everybody. The Virginia Board for Peoples with Disabilities provides a list of resources that can be accessed here. Thank you very much.
And that
Um,
resource list also includes Centers for Independent Living, which I completely forgot about in my like spiel about places in the real like offline world where you can go and meet people who might be interested in disability related mutual aid with you. A Center for Independent Living might be a great place to put up a flyer.
and I think even like a lot of college campuses can be more open. Like Um, I know the at least the university campuses in my city, like if you are not a student there, you can still like walk through the campus and sometimes like see their flyers. So that could also be a space of like, because oftentimes student groups are looking to connect with folks who are like ASAN works with a lot of disability student groups through our ACI program, which shout out to Dean. Dean heads that up. Um, like, and those students are often looking to connect with like self advocates who are not on their campus. So that can be a good way too to like be part of that gap bridging. Um, oh, hang on. We also have somebody. Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought there was another question and my brain restarted. Um, those were the end of our questions for today. If folks have any, like, we can chill for a couple minutes in case anyone's typing. But otherwise, like, I'm going to slowly go through the thank you so much for joining us today, just in case another question pops up in the Q&A, and then otherwise we can give time back to folks. So as I have said, thank you so much for this conversation. I think mutual aid is really, really like mutual aid, bleh, care mapping and pod mapping are all really, these are all really important things to be like thinking about and building right now. And in a time in which we're getting hit with so many different changes and information at once, I think it can be really hard to like be able to anchor ourselves and be like pause and be able to think about like how do I connect with my community. So I appreciate y'all having this conversation, sharing your insights and sharing your information today. And I want to say thank you to everybody who has joined us for this discussion and for like asking all these questions and how you can like start doing this work. It's really, it is a good thing. It is a good thing for us to come together and like be engaged and remind ourselves that like community is a thing we make together. And that is something that cannot be taken from us. That is an incredibly powerful thing. And they can try, like, people who are interested in isolating us can try and make us forget that. Um, but we always have it. We have each other. Um, it looks like we have no further questions. So I'm going to go ahead and end today's session once again. Oh, wait, there we go. We have one more question. Any tips for having open conversations about our needs? I really resonate with the point about specific profiles being centered everywhere.
How about,
Can
oh,
you
sorry, go ahead.
if you wouldn't mind elaborating on what you mean by or specific profiles, or if Zoe or Alex, if you know what they're referring to.
My guess is that the anonymous asker is referring to what someone else said earlier about finding that even in neurodiversity spaces, it's difficult to find someone who can help with a specific thing. Not everyone is safe to discuss things like needing help with life decisions with, or that maybe people with certain support needs are more centered than people with other kinds of support needs. That would be my guess as to what anonymous asker means about specific profiles being centered everywhere.
Yeah, I think I took much the same thing of like, I think it's, my guess was like the way in which like white voices are also centered, like folks with lower support needs are often centered. Like, there we go. Yes, that. And I find that people who don't have capacity to host often don't get understanding of our needs culturally.
So tips for having conversations. I can come up with a few. I'm not sure how applicable they'll be to your situation, anonymous person, but I will do my best. When I'm having a difficult conversation, I like to write everything down. And then sometimes if I'm not feeling like meeting up face to face with someone and reading out what I've written with my voice, I'll just email them everything I wrote, and we can have that conversation over email, or I'll text it to them on their phone and we can have that conversation over text. You know, it is a beautiful world full of many communication methods, and you don't have to have difficult conversations in one particular modality. So do what you want and be free.
Something I would also add is like something that can help open up something that can help like facilitate people feeling comfortable to be vulnerable in that way is like having like perhaps you plan like a check-in meeting or ask the host to plan like a check-in meeting and that meeting is just for people to talk about like what are you experiencing in your life? What are your conditions like right now? How are you coping? What are you like experiencing? Like, what do you need community support with? Um, and I find that like those like meetings can be very grounding and they can be also like they're very helpful in like building community and getting to like getting closer with people. And so that is like one avenue that I can like think about. Yeah.
It also
And
made me
I
some, oh, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, 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 not at all. And I think something that I would add that might help facilitate if you like if you're not able to like if you don't have like if you don't have experience like facilitating vulnerable spaces or like don't have anyone that can help facilitate that, it can be helpful to open up with like a video or like an like something with like something that has like audio and like text, something that like people are able to like absorb, but something that will like set the space for like this is what we're going to be talking about, like this is the framework, especially if this is not like if the group or this is a new group or like this is a group that like hasn't functioned like this in that way. So that can like help kind of like soften people up. And it can be very helpful for you to plan to like share like for someone to like plan to share first because sometimes that like people might be shy and like scared and might not know like what even counts to share, so it can be helpful for like someone to like prepare to share, but sometimes sometimes folks can be chatty and just like so needing that space and so then they feel seen like when you create it.
For sure. I love a regular check-in, especially in a repeating communal space. And also, I too write things down. I use these note cards, the like 5x7 note cards. I will write stuff down, and then when I'm done, I get to recycle it. And it also feels like it's out of my head. I think too of like opening it up and making it a communal conversation where you're like, hey, we haven't talked about like what folks' needs might be. I know that like I'm having some challenges, and I think other people like I feel like I've noticed other people in the group might be as well. That then creates this space where it's again making sure that we're starting off where it's us versus the problem. And I think that can be a really helpful thing too because like it's a weird combo breaker of like folks don't want to hear that they've caused harm, and it's not because they are bad people, it's because it feels really bad when we've hurt somebody, right? Like even if it's just accidentally by creating a space that's not accessible to them or is exclusive, and like creating this sort of collective thing where it becomes about structure. And also it can be too, I think, helpful of like obviously if you are mad, that's valid. Like but like framing it too of like being clear about like what your emotions might be in that space, like hey, I want to talk about something that I think might be a hard conversation. I'm not like and like explaining what you are feeling versus what you aren't, I think is a good like level set to help folks. And there's also things too of like sorry, these are the kind of workshops I do sometimes outside of ASAN work, so now I'm just thinking about like if you're working in a space like with a group and you don't want to necessarily, maybe some folks aren't need more processing time or don't necessarily want to have to share out loud, there's ways to work around that too by having things of like really big notepad. I love really big notepad. Um, you can have a really big notepad and it be something that like folks can stick smaller sticky notes to. Having a space where you go back and forth between like asking questions about like what would make the meeting more like physically accessible, what would make things easier like emotionally, are there like thinking about the different types of needs that might be showing up in the space and like slowly going through them over the course of like a get together or a meeting to give folks a little bit of time for like think about that by yourself and then share out, um and letting everyone like move through that process and making it collective so it's not just like you're the person who has a problem and like having to come and be there, because that also I know for me can feel real bad. I'm just like, so I'm having a hard time. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Um, One last thing that I'll add is that it can be, especially if you're in a space with people who like are already thinking about like accessibility and like accessibility like clashes and all that kind of stuff, it can be helpful to name what norms already exist that are except like what norms like for example like doorways are you know y'all know what I'm talking about. But like perhaps like what like you can like note that like okay, this meeting that we have like it has an agenda. That is an accessibility tool to like help keep folks focused, to like take notes that folks can remember. So I think it can be helpful, especially if you're dealing with folks who are kind of like new to thinking about accessibility, to be like the world is already accessible for like for various people and for various needs. And these are just like needs that perhaps you haven't considered, but like we've always been considering people's needs. So like that can be helpful for to kind of like set that tone and be like, okay, this is like I think it can also be helpful for like people who like might have like access needs and like might have like disabling experiences that like no, don't necessarily use those labels and like might not even know that it's safe for them to even like or like safe for them to even like say that this is a need that I have. So I think that that like kind of like in the neurodiversity kind of framework of being like okay, we all exist in some relationship to disability and accessibility and like how do we make like those things like right and then how can we like when we make those the things that already exist apparent then we can like be like okay what gaps who is like falling between those gaps and how can we create supports that like recognize those folks.
Yes, I had a teacher who called that plate spins, of essentially like things you should keep doing. Of like there's an old-timey like circus thing people do where they put like they balance plates on sticks and then the plates are like spinning. So that's where he would how he would tell us to like keep doing this thing. That's a plate spin. And I think that also sets things up for a more positive tone too in the space. So people are like, right, we are doing things. It's about like how do we expand this? It's not like we're not failing, we're growing. Growing. Focus on the growth. Yeah, like okay. I think I believe that is the end of our questions, and we are almost at the end of our time. So then we're gonna go ahead and wrap. Um, Oluwatobi, Zoe, do y'all have any like closing things you would like to say before I end the webinar? It's
I
also okay
don't.
if
Thank
you
you everyone for listening. It's been awesome.
The last thing that I will say is that like um look, the world is ending now, but the world has ended before multiple times. Like we I think it's very important to like be aware of like what is going on and like despair is a natural response to the things that are happening, the things that have been happening. And also like it is so important to like root yourself in hope as much as you can. Take time to cry and be angry and to despair. Um, and to have an existential crisis, but also like remember that like hope can sometimes be the hard thing, but like that is the thing. If we don't have hope for something else, like there's no capacity, no like ability to even build something else. If you can't dream of it, like it can't happen. So I just like I'm naming that because it's something that like I'm also telling myself. But like yeah, just wanted to just recognize that and I think that it's important to like mourn and grieve and also to remember that like we are we are resilient. And that like even as the world is falling apart, like how are we creating pockets of like joy in our individual lives, in our families, chosen families, communities? Like there will always be joy even as the world is ending. And I think it is our like responsibility to facilitate that for us and for the people around us.
Absolutely beautifully said. And a repeating refrain that I have in my own head, the reminder that like these systems come and systems go, they fall apart, but community still exists. We still exist. And the goal, my goal that I come back to over and over again is how can I be a part of work that makes sure as many of us get to be here for the next system as possible? And that involves that hope and that joy and that connecting with each other. So thank you so much for that. Oh, thank you for closing comment for in the Q&A is International Day of Happiness is tomorrow, everybody. So find what brings you joy. Thank you all so much again for joining us. And everybody, we hope to see you again at future ASAN webinars. Y'all take care and have a good afternoon.
Bye, folks.